So our next speaker is Lori Hoberman. She is a well-known force in the New York City venture community. She advises entrepreneurs and investors on how to build successful businesses and strategically guides them through the emerging later stages and exits of their companies. As a lawyer and mentor, Lori works with clients in a range of industries, including mobile, biotechnology, AI, e-commerce, and advertising. She also counsels angel and institutional investors in their investments and in the formation of investment funds. So we're looking forward to her presentation.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you. I'm Lori Hoberman. I have been working in the venture capital space for many, many years, since the first Silicon Alley boom here in New York City back in the 90s. And I worked with Gwen, I guess, Gwen, it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, on the first round of this, the first contest.
Probably about 5 years ago then.
5 years ago, right? Time flies. Time flies. Well, I'm going to do a quick, very quick kind of tour through how to start up successfully. And I really encourage questions. I wish there was a way we could do this more interactively, but I'm going to go through this. I'm going to try to make sure I leave time for questions at the end. It's going to be very quick, but please come up with some questions. That would be great. So most of this discussion is going to focus on the US because that's where I practice. But what we're going to talk about here, for example, corporations or partnerships or limited liability companies, equally true in every other jurisdiction that you could work in, where there are entities that provide limited liability for investors. There are entities that present preferable ways to form or to do business in the particular jurisdiction. So here in the US, it's either a corporation or a limited liability company. And the differences between the two are basically, in a limited liability company, there are some tax benefits, although current administrations have limited those tax benefits. But basically in an LLC, the entity itself is not taxed, but each of the members are taxed. There's lots of flexibility in how to allocate profits and losses, all within a tax regime. And it's maybe from an administrative standpoint a little more complex than a corporation, because regardless of whether you make distributions out of it, the members are taxed if you have profits no matter what. So you're filing tax returns for each member. A corporation, on the other hand, is simple and clean. What we find in the US is that venture funds will not invest in limited liability companies. One of the reasons is that the losses flow through directly to their balance sheets. So they will only invest in corporate entities. If investment is imminent from a venture fund, then you start by setting up a corporation. Very simple, easy to form. The entity itself is taxed. The owners are taxed. But in the life of a startup company, it's years before you realize a profit anyhow. So a corporation is generally the method of choice if you're anticipating institutional investors early on. They both provide liability protection for the members, which is very important. Next slide. So once you're set up, you have to figure out how you're going to bring on board employees. Generally, you probably can't afford to hire too many employees or any in the very early stages. So often what happens is you end up granting equity in your company to employees. I'm going to repeat this a few times during this discussion. Be very stingy. Do not give away a lot of equity in the beginning. Each of you as founders will work 24/7 for this business. And if you are left with little to no equity at the end of the day, you will resent it. So I really recommend you being very stingy with your employees. It's not a nice thing to say, but I really recommend it. It's customary, and I'm going to talk in a corporate entity, and there are similar structures in other jurisdictions as well. In a corporate entity, it's customary at the very beginning kind of even around the first funding round, to set aside 10 to 20%, sometimes 25% for employee compensation. You're not issuing a lot at the beginning. You could be bringing on board people who you might view as a co-founder. That would mean that you would probably giving them more equity. But if you're hiring, for example, a CTO or a chief revenue officer, somebody's going to focus on sales, the likelihood is you're going to issue them equity out of an option pool. It's the way you do that and the way you make sure that you're protecting your equity and you're going to keep your employee interested is to vest them over time. So standard venture vesting is 4 years with a 1-year cliff. So for example, if you're hiring a chief revenue officer or a VP of sales or somebody who's going to head your sales team, you might issue that person, let's say, I don't know, 4%. I'm picking 4% because the math is easy. 4% of the company in the form of a stock option grant. It means they don't actually hold the stock. It means they have an option to buy. And that option under standard venture vesting would vest over 4 years with a 1-year cliff, meaning 4% grant, 25% of that, or 1%, will vest on the first anniversary of the date of grant. So that's the 1-year cliff. It gives you a chance to try and buy. Do you like this employee? Do you like that person enough so that they have the potential to own equity in the company? That's the 1-year cliff. So if that doesn't work out, the employee leaves within a year, or you fire the employee within a year, they get 0 equity. But if they're staying on, it's a 1-year cliff, and then typically it's either quarterly or monthly vesting for the remaining 3 years. So that's standard venture vesting in a standard stock option pool for a corporation. If you're setting up a limited liability company or a company overseas, that entity would likely be, so it would have similar stock equity or equity grant compensation for employees. Next slide. So how do you protect your employees? How do you protect your IP from your employees? Each of you is coming up with some pretty interesting intellectual property. You want to make sure that you protect it not only from potential customers, potential partners, but clearly from your employees too. So it's very important that every employee sign something called a proprietary information and invention assignment agreement. That basically has several paragraphs of confidentiality information. So you're telling your employee what they're learning when they work for the company is completely confidential. And then it has invention assignment language, which means anything the employee invents or works or helps others to invent or create while they're an employee of the company belongs to the company. Some of that language goes as far to say anything you invent during your entire term of employment, whether you're doing it during the moments that you're working or whether you're doing it at night when you're not working, doesn't matter, it belongs to the company. You have to figure out how far you want to reach with that, but that kind of language is very, very important so that you own your intellectual property. It forces the employee, it's if you have a falling out with a particular employee and the employee leaves and tries to set up a competitive business, which by the way it happens frequently, you would want to make sure that you have hamstrung that employee, you bound that employee so that anything they try to take with them, they won't succeed with that. You can go after them and enforce this contract. It becomes even more important in current days where we're seeing, at least in the US, that jurisdictions are less and less likely to enforce non-competes. That's we used to include in these proprietary information and invention assignment agreements non-competes, so that we would try to bind an employee for 1 year after they left the company to not engage with a competitive business. It's not being respected anymore. Most states are basically saying that you cannot bind an employee unless there are special circumstances or unless the employee is very high up in the company. You generally cannot bind them to a non-compete. So in that kind of environment, this type of invention assignment restriction language is very important. And again, something like this is as good as the paper it's written on, but it gives you the ability to contractually enforce and go after somebody in court. Next slide. How do you protect that IP from third parties? So similar, patent applications, trade secrets, license agreements, really important that you don't, I get this question often. How am I supposed to entice an investor when I don't want to share the secret sauce? It's a very fine line. And in general, venture funds in the US will not sign non-disclosure agreements when they're first talking to you. They will sign them eventually. But that initial conversation, that kind of teaser conversation, they generally will not sign non-disclosure agreements. So it's a fine line. I always tell my clients, what you put in the teaser is very high level. You're not giving away the secret sauce. It needs to be intriguing enough to get a potential investor interested in you. So you need to walk that line carefully. And it's helpful, especially if what you have is really serious trade secret or serious stuff that's patentable. It's helpful to file a patent application. In the US, you have 1 year after you start talking about that invention to get that patent on file, as a general rule. In other jurisdictions, there's no grace period. So before you even disclose anything, you need to have a patent application on file if that's the direction you're going to go in. Trade secrets it's black boxing, basically. It's saying that you're placing your trade secrets in a black box. Nobody other than probably you have access to the full picture. If you have employees working on it, they might see bits and pieces of it, but nobody sees the full picture. License agreements are important. You'll enter into license agreements with parties, and you'll make it very clear in the license agreement that you own all your intellectual property. Same thing with joint ventures. Next slide. Why do I need a board of directors? When you bring on board you don't need one in the beginning. The beginning, you are the board of directors. If you have co-founders, it's you. You are making the decisions of the company. When you bring in outside capital, your investors might want to say in what's going on in the business. That's when you start to need an official board of directors. And a board of directors is not a terrible thing, although 9 times out of 10, the founders end up at odds with the members of the board. And you cannot remove them. So it often presents challenges when the business grows. But if you're fortunate enough to choose wisely and you have good investors, and those investors want to see the company succeed, you can create a very helpful board. I like to start with 3, 5 is more likely. If there, let's say, are 2 co-founders of a company, each of you would be on the board and you would invite an investor. And that's how you would typically look after a Series seed funding around. Once you do your Series A, you're going to add that Series A investor or the lead Series A investor, and you're going to add an independent. It's always good to have an independent on the board. That independent, and they truly should be independent. They cannot be an owner of the company. They can't be affiliated with a customer. They really should be an industry luminary. And so that they offer an independent view, separate and apart from you and your co-founder, and separate and apart from the investor. And that dynamic in a 5-member board is helpful. 2 co-founders or 2 representing the common stock. You guys would be the common stock. And then 2 representing the investors, 1 the Series Seed, 1 the Series A, and then an independent. It's a nice makeup of a board. Next slide. Boards face their own issues, duty of care, duty of loyalty. They have to act in the best interest of the company. And if you follow the news, you'll see there have been many lawsuits recently against a board of directors. It's very good to have D&O insurance. Go to the next slide, please. D&O insurance covers you if it covers the board, it covers you as the officers of the company, it protects you if you are in a litigious jurisdiction. The US, unfortunately, is a very litigious jurisdiction. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about raising capital. That's the thing that I think is on most founders' minds. How do you get enough capital to keep the company going? I always say bootstrap your business for as long as possible. That way you're preserving your equity. You're preserving your equity and you're, sorry about this, and you're holding off until you bring in investors and you're creating value. If you're lucky enough to have wealthy friends and family, take the money from them. If you're lucky enough and you're comfortable enough doing it, take the money from them in the beginning. It generally lets you set the terms that you want to set. You can set them favorable. And as long as you're comfortable taking money from them, it's a really good way to go. The first funding round is typically in the form of a convertible note or a SAFE. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's go next slide. Just general, some sources of funding that you might find. Let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about the two most common types of initial funding. Convertible notes or SAFEs. A SAFE is a simple agreement for future equity. That's what it stands for. It basically, it's very similar to a convertible note, which you invest, you get a debt security, a convertible note that just basically converts to equity at the next funding round. The difference between a SAFE and a note is that the SAFE does not have a maturity date and it does not accrue interest, both of which are very helpful for the company. Most typically, deals are done in the form of a SAFE here in the US. There's generally either one, convertible notes or a SAFE. There's usually a valuation cap, meaning if you take the money from the SAFE and you hit it out of the ballpark and you do really, really well, you still give that initial investor the benefit of a lower value. So let's say the SAFE has a valuation cap of 5 million. Let's say you go out and you raise money at 10. That SAFE, those SAFE holders would convert at that 5 million valuation cap. You can also give the SAFE holders a discount. Usually it's either or, whatever gets the SAFE holders or the note holders the most shares on conversion. Let's keep going. Next slide. Again, don't part with a lot of equity, even not only to your employees, but definitely not to your investors. That's one of the reasons why a SAFE or a convertible note offers the best way to do it. When you first start, you have nothing. You're able to entice investors based on who you are. They're basically investing in the founder at that point, because the likelihood is you do not have a fully baked idea. You might have a proof of concept. You don't have a whole lot. So if you can find an investor to invest at that early stage, you don't have a lot of value. The SAFE or the convertible note puts off the determination of value until your next funding round. It's very helpful. Next slide. Pre-money value. Let's keep going. Let's do another slide. This is all focused more on the detail of the deal, and I want to make sure I leave time for questions. Let's go to the next one. This means that when you bring on an investor, the investors come in based on the assumption that there's an option pool fully outstanding. They do not want to be penalized or diluted for your grant of equity to employees. So if you're selling 20% to a venture capital firm in a deal, they're going to require at least 10% set aside in an option pool, which means you're effectively diluted for 30%. Let's do the next slide. The VC wish lists. Let's go down 2 slides to the one that is entitled, let's see. Yeah, let's go to the next slide, getting in the VC door. So the last thing I want to talk about is really, how do you entice an investor? You put together a teaser document, and the teaser document, it's a 1-pager or a 2-pager. Your potential investors here, at least in the US, have the attention span of a flea. They need short bullet point language. Pictures are helpful. So it's 1 page just to entice their interest. If they want to learn more, they will learn more, but you need to get their attention for a second. If they won't pay more than that. They won't pay it more attention than that if you don't grab them in the beginning. So 5 must-haves in an executive summary or a teaser. You have to hit these 5 points. What does the company do? First line, you tell them what the company does. Second paragraph, what's the problem with the current state of your industry? Why do we need your business? The third paragraph, what's the company's solution for that problem? Here you describe the solution. Fourth, who is the market for that solution? This is really important. Do you know your market? In 1 paragraph, prove that you know your market. What are the demographics? Where do they live? How do you find them? Is it a business? Is it consumer? What's the pie chart that shows how much of that market you can reach? It's an effective pie chart. And then the last, most important point is, how are you going to reach that market to make money? Every one of your investors, they're not investing out of the goodness of their heart. They want to know how they're going to make money from you. So that's the 5th point. And that is an ideal executive summary. I'm going to stop here, and I'm just going to open it up to questions. And I know I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch.
Hey, Lori, just a question. What things should we get a lawyer for? What things can we just do on a napkin? What things, those kind of considerations.
Soon as you are required to sign something, it means that you're entering into a contractual arrangement. You want to have someone reviewing it. So, once you start looking for money and talking to investors, a good point in time to have a lawyer is that term sheet time or those discussions, so you can shape it in the way it's most favorable to you. You generally, if you're hiring an employee, you want an employment agreement. If you definitely need a proprietary information invention assignment agreement. Most lawyers who work in this space have startup packages where they're forms. We give you forms. Nobody's recreating the wheel in these very early documents. They're good, solid forms to work with. Even if you look at a SAFE. So a SAFE is an instrument that was started by an incubator here in the US. And if you go onto their website, Y Combinator, you'll find the form SAFEs. There's a lot has been simplified and made far more accessible. So, even if you are hiring a lawyer in the beginning, the costs should be low. You're not really incurring significant legal fees until you're raising a Series seed round. It's your first equity round. That's where that's where you're looking at a much more expensive proposition. But in the early stages, it's a couple of $1,000s. Did I answer that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? All right.
So far.
All right. So don't let me keep you from lunch.
Thanks so much, Lori. We really appreciate it. As a reminder, obviously, you all know that the recording will be shared. All the resources that Lori also shared will be available to you. And Lori, thank you so much for your advice. We really appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. Next time.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.